Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Net neutrality is once again on the chopping block. It actually kind of just got eviscerated. And let's talk about this, basically what's going on and why it should not die. And with that, there was a really good write-up in The Verge by Lauren Feiner about what just happened to net neutrality. And with that, we're going to dive in, and I'm cribbing from her, but then we're going to basically talk about why this is beyond critical to essentially the success of the internet and startups as well. So with that, let's talk about net neutrality, because those rules, which briefly came back during the Biden administration, were just again struck down by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we know that incoming President Trump, now President-elect, soon to be president, when he was formerly president, was not a fan either and had struck them down. Now, this three-panel judge ruled that the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, does not have the authority to impose net neutrality rules on internet service providers. Now, the FCC had sought to reclassify ISPs as common carriers under Title II of the Communications Act in order to impose policies that were essentially there to prevent them from discriminating against different types of internet traffic by slowing speeds or blocking content. This is something, for the record, that the ISPs have done in the past, and we will definitely be diving into that. But the judges disagreed with the agency's interpretations of how ISPs could be classified and were essentially emboldened. Now, why were they emboldened, and why is this now possible? Because of a recent Supreme Court ruling that essentially struck down the principle of Chevron deference that has been in place for decades. Now, we'll talk about Chevron deference because I think this one also is a ruling that I disagreed with. Now, after the Supreme Court killed this earlier in 2024, courts became essentially more free to favor their own interpretations over that of the actual expertise and the experts at all of these various agencies. Net neutrality was immediately seen as a prime target once Chevron deference was killed, and while the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld previous iterations of net neutrality, the Sixth Circuit judges noted that they literally relied on Chevron deference to now make these rulings that go essentially that are contrarian to the experts in this. Quote, "Unlike past challenges that the D.C. Circuit considered under Chevron, we no longer afford deference to the FCC's reading of that statute." End quote. So what we're essentially left with is judges that are experts in the law, but not experts in this case at technology or actually how the internet works. Yet now they're free to make their own uninformed decisions that essentially impact all of us. And the history is there if you read it, which I'm going to literally dive into. So, with President-elect soon basically to be once again president, and remember, under his first term, net neutrality was previously killed. Essentially, he's taking office in weeks, which means this could be the last that we hear about any kind of attempt to reclassify broadband providers as common carriers for quite some time. Now, Republican Commissioner Brendan Carr of the FCC, and remember, the FCC essentially has, at the time, an equal number of Republicans and Democrats, but whoever party is in power, whichever party is in power, has one more. So the Republicans will take the majority of the FCC away from the Democrats. If a Democrat wins in 2028, the Democrats get it back, et cetera, et cetera. So Republican Commissioner Brendan Carr, who is on basically the FCC's chair, and quite frankly, I've agreed with a lot of the stuff he said in the past, and some stuff he has said as well I totally disagree with. Like right now, basically he is Trump's pick to essentially lead the agency, taking it from Morrison Warsaw once Trump assumes office. And Carr issued a lengthy statement saying that this was a good win for the country. Brendan Carr is anti-net neutrality, and he's going to be running, for all intents and purposes, the FCC, and we assume he's going to pass that confirmation standard. So with that, net neutrality, and let's dive into this. And I think that's a good primer by Laura Feiner of The Verge. But let's dive into this, because net neutrality, and I have written on this, I've written articles for Smerconish, I think Forbes, I've done segments on this, radio segments, videos on this, all this kind of stuff. Net neutrality isn't perfect. It's not perfect by any stretch, but essentially what's going to happen here is the exact opposite of what many people think will happen. Essentially, what is being said by the anti-net neutrality people is, oh, we have to kill this to let companies thrive and grow, and it basically will increase competition. It actually does the exact opposite. And history proves, the evidence proves that it does the exact opposite. of what the anti-net neutrality crowd is claiming. And with all this talk about the negatives of net neutrality here, it's a good win to kill this. Let's focus on the pros of what net neutrality is. Net neutrality, essentially, as it's written, basically guarantees equal access to information. It essentially states and guarantees that all users can access any website or online service, whatever that service is, without being slowed down or blocked by their internet service provider or ISP. Therefore, it promotes the free flow of information and ideas. It also boosts innovation because it encourages startups and smaller businesses to compete on the internet without needing to pay extra for faster speeds, which obviously basically ensures increased competition. Imagine that you're a new startup with streaming and you have to pay 10 times more than a Netflix has to pay for your users or potential users to reach you, which means you're passing that cost on to consumers. Well, then nobody would leave Netflix. And the only ones that have really come up from Netflix have billions of dollars behind them. But what about that innovative startup that has a new idea? And it's not just streaming, it's anything on the internet. On top of it, it offers consumer protection because it prevents ISPs from charging different prices for different types of content, protecting consumers from potential price gouging. In other words, if you're paying a flat rate and they're giving you a flat rate, they can't slow you down based on what you go to. In other words, if you're paying $100 a month for internet, they can't overcharge you, let's say, just to use streaming or then slow your streaming service down. If you're paying for, 100 megabit of speed, you're getting 100 megabit of speed no matter what you're doing. On top of it, it increases and really assures fair competition because it creates a level playing field for all online businesses, preventing larger companies from unfairly influencing internet access. As a business owner myself in cybersecurity, I'm not CrowdStrike. I don't have that level of money, right? But we do pretty well, I'd like to think. And by virtue of that, I would hate for basically to be overspent. They can overspend me in advertising, but if it's slowing down, let's say, potential consumers that would use me over somebody else, and for the record, I don't consider CrowdStrike a competitor, this is what we're talking about, right? On top of it, I think it really does promote democratic values because it supports the free exchange of information and ideas, which is beyond crucial to essentially a healthy democracy. And so I wouldn't want to see that essentially leave. And if you're thinking this and you're listening to this or you're watching this and you're thinking, Nick, this is crazy. The big companies don't do this. They never do this. So what's even the point of the law? No, they haven't been playing nice. Net neutrality, before it was around, we saw numerous violations of what net neutrality is. And so let's go through the litany that I've gone through before over the years as to why these companies will absolutely violate our rights and abilities if net neutrality is gone. So with that, first one's first, let's talk about a North Carolina ISP known as Madison River. In 2005, again, before net neutrality, basically Madison River started blocking VoIP or voice over IP service provider known as Vonage. Now, Vonage filed a complaint with the FCC after receiving a slew of customer complaints. The FCC basically stepped in to sanction Madison River to prevent it from further blocking, but it lacked the authority to stop that kind of abuse at that time. Net neutrality actually fixed that. That is illegal under net neutrality. Now, let's move on. Comcast, have you heard of them? They're probably the largest internet service provider in the United States. In 2005, they essentially began secretly blocking peer-to-peer technologies that basically that their customers were using. So users of services like BitTorrent, Nutella, and others were unable to connect to those services. 2007 investigations from the Associated Press, EFF, and others confirmed that Comcast was indeed blocking or slowing file sharing applications without disclosing this fact to its customers. So you're paying for Comcast, you're trying to use peer-to-peer for whatever reason, and by virtue of that, your own ISP that you're paying for isn't letting you in. Net neutrality fixed that as well. AT&T, from 2007 to 2009, AT&T forced Apple, maker of the iPhone, to block Skype and other competing VoIP phone services on the iPhone. The wireless provider then wanted to prevent iPhone users from basically using any application that would allow them to make calls over basically voice services. In other words, using an app on your phone to establish communication, something we all do today, as opposed to using the call service that AT&T has. The Google Voice app received similar treatment from carriers like AT&T when it came around in 2009. Net neutrality fixed that as well. Now let's look at Windstream. They are a provider. They have 1 million subscribers. They do DSL. They do other types. A lot of businesses use Windstream. In 2010, with more than 1 million customers at that time, they basically copped to hijacking user search queries that were made using the Google toolbar within Firefox. Users who believed they had basically set their browser search engines to their choice were redirected to Windstream's own search portal and results. In other words, as they were querying Google, essentially Windstream was rerouting their DNS to wherever Windstream wanted. That is anti-competitive. Net neutrality fixed that. Metro PCS, basically a cellular carrier. In 2011, they, at the time, were in the top 5 of U.S. wireless carriers, announced plans to block streaming video over its 4G network from all sources except YouTube. Now, Metro PCS then threw its weight behind Verizon's court challenge against the FCC's 2010 open internet ruling, hoping that the rejection of the agency's authority would allow the company to continue anti-consumer practices. You didn't want to watch YouTube, you wanted to watch something else, didn't matter, Metro PCS would block you. Net neutrality fixed that. On top of it, we have Paxfire. If you don't know who they are, in 2011, the EFF, or Electronic Frontier Foundation, found that several small ISPs were redirecting search queries to Paxfire. Now, an ISP identified in the initial EFF report, they included Cavalier, Cogent, Frontier, which is pretty large on the West Coast, Fuse, DirectPC, RCN, and basically Wide Open West, or WOW. Paxfire would intercept your search request at Bing and Yahoo and then redirect it to another page by skipping over the search service's results. These ISPs would then collect referral fees from Paxfire for delivering users to select websites. In other words, you weren't getting the search results you wanted, you were getting the search results that essentially Paxfire wanted you to have, and they were paying your ISPs to do that. That is illegal under net neutrality. It's anti-competitive. Let's talk about AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon all together, because between 2011 through 2013, AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon blocked Google Wallet, a mobile payment system that had competed with a similar service called ISIS. Bad name, but AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon had economic stakes in developing ISIS, and they didn't want the competition from Google, and here we are. Net neutrality fixed that. On top of it, we've got Verizon again in 2012 because the FCC caught Verizon Wireless blocking people from using tethering applications on their phones, aka hotspotting, which we all now do for no extra charge. Thank you, net neutrality. Verizon had asked Google to remove 11 free tethering applications from the Android marketplace. These applications allowed users to circumvent Verizon's $20 tethering fee and turn their smartphones into hotspots. By blocking those applications, Verizon violated net neutrality pledges it made to the FCC as a condition of basically the 2008 Airwaves auction where they got more bandwidth. Net neutrality works. AT&T in 2012 announced that they would disable the FaceTime video calling app, which a bazillion people use these days, but AT&T was going to disable it in 2012 on their customers' iPhones unless they subscribe to a more expensive plan. There you go. AT&T had one goal, separating customers from their money, and here we are. On top of it, we had network-wide issues regardless of ISP. Throughout 2013 and early 2014, people across the country experienced slower speeds when you were going to websites and applications. So, for example, many complained about streaming from Netflix, that it was getting choppy and degraded. I actually remember that. Others had trouble connecting to video conference sites and making basically VoIP calls over the internet. So, an Open Technology Institute investigation that drew on the Measurement Lab's data analysis found that these slowdowns were a result of, quote, intentional policies by some of the nation's largest communication companies, which led to significant months-long degradation of a consumer product for millions of people. In other words, Netflix lost probably a lot of money, And a lot of these were spinning up their own competing services. Major broadband providers, including AT&T, Time Warner, Verizon, they all deliberately limited the capacity of these interconnection points. In other words, if I'm sitting on AT&T and the local Netflix host is Verizon, basically that interconnectivity, as I jump from AT&T to Verizon or Warner Cable, level 3, whatever it is, that's where those choke points were. Now, they were effectively throttling the delivery of content to basically thousands of businesses and millions of residents across the country. Net neutrality made that illegal, and now it's gone. On top of it, we've got Verizon. During oral arguments in court, Verizon v. FCC in 2013, judges asked whether the phone giant would favor some preferred services, content, or sites over others if the court overruled net neutrality, basically open internet rules at the time. Verizon's counsel, Helgi Walker, said this, and I quote, "I'm authorized to state from my client, Verizon, today that but for these rules, we would be exploring those types of arrangements." That's what we are talking about here. This is why net neutrality is beyond important. You can't say you haven't been basically told the evidence now if you've made it this far in the video, but this is the problem that we have. Is that if we are getting rid of that which essentially ensures our equal access, be prepared for, let's say, some, Verizon to back Hulu, and now your Netflix is degraded, but your Hulu isn't, go switch to Hulu, whatever that is. Or the startups that have to pay more. Or you having to pay more for a better plan to get better streaming services when net neutrality protected a lot of this. It is a consumer protection that we are losing. And I think that is a huge thing that we really need to understand. And I know the detractors will say, Nick, you're completely wrong. It doesn't stifle competition. Well, I just showed you the evidence that it does. And literally Verizon admitted it in court because their counsel was authorized to state it. So here we are. Best of luck to us. I am not a fan of this, if you couldn't tell. And we will see what happens. But best of luck to us in 2025 and beyond when it comes to free and open internet and equal access. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well, where hopefully you won't be throttled anytime soon because net neutrality is gone. And same with Blue Sky and Mastodon, the new startups that, quite frankly, probably can't pay for the bandwidth that a Facebook can. So stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private and informed. Take care.